So I'm really looking forward to going over this chapter right now, and mainly just hearing all of you and your responses as we do these do discussions on this chapter because I don't think it'll take very far. Excuse me. Goodness, why do I always have that when I'm doing these things? Anyways, um, in this chapter, as you read it, it's going to feel so present with us, right? Because we know that in the elections taking place right now to see who's going to be who's going to run for president for the Democrats and the Republicans, we've seen a surge of political spectrums and perspectives by characters such as Trump and Bernie Sanders, which I'll talk about in a second, that the establishment did not see coming, and many people on the ground, average citizens, did not see coming. But it's rooted in the issues that were taking place all the way here in the 19th century, which was the wealth disparities and the issue of the generation of wealth in this country. And so I kind of want to try to play both sides on this to a certain extent. I definitely have my own opinion on these things. It's hard for any of us not to. And we need to be honest that many of us, our economic circumstances are going to usually reflect the kind of views we have about wealth, right? If you can work hard and make money, then you start to see a perspective, sympathetic to the business class. When you're working in jobs, if you even have a job and the pay is very low and you have companies or bosses that don't seem to care or don't seem to be looking out after their workers, it's easy to start sympathizing towards politics that is more reflective of the interests of the worker, right? Okay. I thought what was interesting here is I just put these two cutouts of two different things that I wanted you to see before we went into the chapter. That this debate has been going on for a while. The issue of the wealthy person versus the worker. Okay, capital, as in a person who owns the means of production, versus the person who works in it. Now, Jhansi Calhoun is very interesting. He was discussed in my 101 class as, a member of the House of Representatives in the Senate, and he was Vice President of the United States and Secretary of War. Very prestigious political career. And he also made a very strong defense for slavery. And this is before the Civil War. But there's a reason why I'm having us go over this. Is I wanted to show you the ironies of looking at the language that he uses in this 1837 speech as a man of wealth who is a slave owner defending the institution of slavery and having wealth, and then the Communist Manifesto, which I'll have you read, and we'll go over communism and Karl Marx more a little later because communism is going to have a major effect on the 20th century. It's going to be one of the main ideologies in which the United States is going to be competing with, not just combating, but competing with. Okay, because as bad as the Soviet Union ended up being and how it fell apart and all the horrors that you read about, the purges and the famines in communist China, and then really bad in Pol Pot's Khmer Rouge of Cambodia, the fact of the matter is that communism ends up becoming very, very popular. And so the question would be, well, what, if we know in retrospect that communism didn't go the way it was supposed to, and that many people, we're used to a time period where we had many people fleeing from communist countries coming to the United States, it might surprise us that communism ended up being so popular and that there were popular revolutions where, communism isn't just an ideology that people fled from. It's an ideology that many, many, many average normal people have gravitated towards, especially during these earlier periods from the late 19th century into the early 20th century. Okay, so we'll explore that more and why that is. But notice this, Jhansi Calhoun's speech. He says, and this is, I'm just taking parts of it. I hold then that there never has yet existed a wealthy and civilized society in which one portion of the community did not, in point of fact, live on the labor of the other. Whoa, right? Broad and general as is this assertion, it is fully born out of history, by history. There is and always has been in an advanced stage of wealth and civilization a conflict between labor and capital. In other words, the workers and the bosses, right? Then he says, the condition of society in the South exempts us from the disorders and dangers resulting from this conflict, and which explains why it is that the political condition of the slaveholding states has been so much more stable and quiet than that of the North. Unquote. So Jhansi Calhoun is trying to basically say that to be a wealthy society meant that those who own the means of production, labor, capital, the capitalists, also called bourgeoisie, that will always be in conflict with labor, and there will always be that lack of stability, okay, that class conflict. And then he tries to argue and says, well, by us having a slave who can't have any choices, we've stabilized things. Because after all, we're not being inhuman, we're simply participating in something that all civilization must deal with, right? Which is this class disparity. And of course, he was on the winning side from the capitalist point of view and the slaveholding point of view. He wasn't a worker, just an average worker, nor a slave. So it's easy to see why he would gravitate towards, kind of celebrating that aspect of history. Then we go to the Communist Manifesto, originally written in German by Marx with Engels. And this is what it says. I'll just kind of try to read it briefly. The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. In other words, history's always had class struggles. Saying the same thing that Calhoun said. Freeman and slave, patrician and plebeian, lord and serf, guild and master, journeyman, in a word, oppressor and oppressed, stood in constant opposition to one another, carried on an uninterrupted, now hidden, now open fight, a fight that each time ended either in a revolutionary reconstruction of society at large or in the common ruin of the contending classes. In the earlier epochs of history, we find almost everywhere a complicated arrangement of society into various orders, okay? And so he goes through all these different classes. Then he says, the modern bourgeoisie society, in other words, the capitalist society, such as what we live in now, that has sprouted from the ruins of feudal society, has not done away with class antagonisms. In other words, the issue of capital and labor having conflict, as mentioned by Calhoun, it still exists, and it still exists now, right? New forms of struggle in the place of the old ones. Our epic, the epic of the bourgeoisie, of the capitalists, is what he's saying, possesses, however, this distinct feature. It has simplified class antagonism. Society as a whole is more and more splitting up into two great hostile camps, into two great classes directly facing each other, bourgeoisie and proletariat. In other words, capital versus labor. Okay, and so I'm just kind of showing you that elites and people on the side of the wealthy and the people who are fighting on the side of the poor were all making these statements. I mean, it's really kind of wild to me, and I discovered this on my own accidentally by teaching the one class, and the other, noticing the Communist Manifesto and Calhoun saying almost the same thing, but on two different opposite sides. Okay, now in today's elections, okay, I'm going to show you little clips here, and so I'm doing all this to get us kind of going into to think about where we're at in the present as we reflect on this past in the U.S. history. Okay, so here's Bernie Sanders. If you haven't seen him, he's barely shown on the mainstream media, but he's been very popular. And this is his approach to the current conditions economically.
Here's the simple truth. that in America we have millions and millions of working people who are working hard but are not making enough money to put bread on the table or to take care of their kids, and that has got to end. Today, all over America, you got mom working, you got dad working, occasionally you have the kids working, and we still don't have enough money to pay the bills. Something is fundamentally wrong about that. The problems we face did not come down from the heavens. They are made by bad human decisions. And good human decisions can change them. It is time that the United...
Okay, so there, right? That's one perspective. He's what we call a leftist. And here's Donald Trump. No! Let's see if I can get it. Okay, here we go.
So we're going to be discussing something so important for our country, for our economy, and for getting us all working again and working well again. It's a tax reform that I think will make America strong and great again. Too few Americans are working. Too many jobs are being shipped overseas. And too many middle-income families cannot make ends meet. This plan directly meets these challenges and the challenges also of business. It will provide major tax relief for middle income and for most other Americans. There will be a major tax reduction. It'll simplify the tax code.
Okay, so what we see here, Bernie Sanders is really talking about utilizing more taxes from the wealthy to balance out for the average lower to middle income brackets. Donald Trump is talking about cutting back taxes. Both of them are appealing to, though, the broader public, saying that this what will make America great again are really two different visions on how to deal with wealth. Bernie Sanders comes from the more of the working class perspective anyways, and Donald Trump is not even a self-made man in the sense that he was born into wealth, but he represents wealth that many Americans would like to aspire to, you know. And so, but there's two different visions about that, and both sides would say that the other are the ones that are why Americans are suffering and not doing as good as they should be doing at this current time. So I just thought I would kind of show you just the relevance of so many things going on, and just think about a few other things, like such as what I had you read from Calhoun and Karl Marx. I'm going to stop here and we'll start getting into the lecture dealing with the chapter directly.
It'll grow the...
Oops.